Are you a leader in customer success, pre-sales, professional services, support? Do you work behind the scenes and roll up your sleeves to make sure that customers are happy? Renew. Then this is for you. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Welcome to the GSD Podcast. Getting it done. Services, success, and software. We'll talk with the pros that have been in the trenches, getting service teams off the ground, launching new types of groups to service customers, or running agencies that don't have a product attached to it. For the pros, by the pros. This is the GSD Podcast, and this is your host, Jeff Kushmerek.
Hey there, it's Jeff. Super excited for the next episode here of the Getting Services Done podcast. I, as we say, met a friend on the internet, Michael Buccellato. We're part of the Gain, Grow, Retain community, where I go in and if I see some questions about implementation or onboarding and things like that, try and answer them, and total free community. So if you haven't signed up for that, I definitely would do that. And we just hit it off, and Michael reached out to me and asked a couple of questions. And I think, as I said in the podcast, we just said, "Hey, we should just record this." So it's really cool. I mean, with somebody who's up and coming in the industry, and they're trying out some stuff that might not have been done, or some new ways of doing things. And Michael's got a really great perspective on doing this. He does have some big company experience, starting off at Oracle, and now he's at LogGeeks, which is startup, Series C, and they're doing fantastic this year. So really just excited to get this one out there and get your feedback. Thanks a lot. Okay, here we are. All right, thanks for joining. All right, so actually this is another podcast, and I think they're going to come out in after the one that I'm talking about, where we haven't worked together. Right. So this has always been the dream, because I just think people get so sick of hearing my same stories over and over again. And I do think that there's more of a professional tone when it's somebody that I haven't been in the trenches with for a while. We can get into some more deeper topics instead of being like, remember that time and things like that. So Michael Buccellato, we were just joking about this beforehand, because we each have last names that we from kindergarten on jump in and just no, it's Kushmerek. Don't worry about it. I got you.
It's a nice Irish name. I always like to joke. So
that's my dad's. That was his go-to right there. Nice Irish name. It's so funny. That's awesome. So Michael, we're coming into this from the success, which I actually was touching on a bunch on my first batch of the podcast. A lot of it because success. Now correctly, and I believe owns the onboarding and implementation phases. So we met through the Gain, Grow, Retain community, which covers lots of stuff that I should never weigh in on. But when implementation stuff comes up, I'm like, oh, I know a couple things about that. And so you reached out, and we had a chat, and we say we should do a podcast. There's enough here to get a good 30 in, as they say in the business, right? So welcome. And why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing right now for your current company?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's very obvious that folks are really trying to rely on their network and, connect with people. And in this current climate where we're all stuck at home, I think it's important that we develop connections with people. And you've been so kind to offer some insights, and I'm very appreciative of that. And happy to be here today to talk about onboarding, implementation, and just how to be successful when thinking about bringing new customers on board. So for myself, I've been in the software space for upwards of 8 years, from business development roles to, as of recent last 5 years or so, working in in post-sale customer success. So
Yeah.
having started out at Oracle Marketing Cloud and then to 2 startups, I'm currently at a legal tech company where I manage a book of business for our highest ARR clients, our enterprise clients.
Yep.
And onboarding is, it's the most important phase of the life cycle, as it's repeatedly drilled into our heads, and it occupies a lot of space on your LinkedIn thread, I'm sure. So happy to be here to talk about it.
Yeah, and so I almost did the "it's funny." I've noticed, Michael. It's just the worst. Well, and thanks for the nice comments, and thanks for listening to me. Because as I say, if my kids don't listen to me, at least somebody does, right? So, and they're the best. I shouldn't say that in case they're listening to this in 10, 15 years. But I think it's because now onboarding is owned and tied to renewals in the SaaS world, is where it's kind of gotten this increased spotlight. And whether you call it onboarding and implementation, and I think a case can be made for either of those, and there's delineations, but I think in the SaaS world, it's just super important. As you said, it's starting this off on the right foot, and as one of my strong beliefs is in the pre-sales world of starting off the relationship there. Well, so 2 questions before we get into the current, more on the transition, because I just went over this with somebody else. How did you feel going from one of the biggest software companies out there to the startup? And we can focus this on onboarding and implementation. What was your biggest sort of like, wow, that's a lot different than what I'm used to from Oracle? And I've worked for Oracle too, and I had a company that was acquired by them. So yeah, absolutely, would love to hear that.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent with just the transition from working at a big company to a small company. When we think about onboarding in the vein of a large corporation, resources are abundant, right? And what that means is people have very specific roles to handle very specific things. So if we're thinking about that in the vein of a huge company like Oracle, you have someone who's project managing an onboarding. You have somebody who's the business focused person on the onboarding, which technically is the customer success person, who's coming in after the product is technically implemented, right? Most of the technical implementation is already done. The success person is overseeing the project. So to that point, a lot of different people, which makes it even more important as a customer success manager to really be on the same page with all the internal resources. Half the battle at working at a huge company like that is managing internal resources, right? And ensuring that that's properly communicated to the customer and that they're aligned with expectations when it comes to timelines and overall just outcomes of what they're looking to get out of the relationship. So, pivoting to a smaller organization, you're wearing those hats, right? You're having to do all of that, which it's a blessing and a curse, right? You get
the
to learn
concept, as I call it.
You get to learn a lot, but things can fall through the cracks pretty easily. I think for me, it's been having had the experience on both sides of it. It's been amazing to develop new parts of my skill set and see things from a different perspective, which has ultimately helped me think about how we engage with customers on an onboarding from a smaller stage company. So I think that's where a lot of the value lies is growing your skill set and seeing things differently and being able to have influence on how you build out processes in a smaller organization.
No, 100% agree. When you're at that large company, you just set it up exactly how I would have answered as well too. Sort of like, here's my project manager, and here's my support person, and here's my X, and here's my Y. Whereas in startups, like you might be all of them, right? And you start off kind of everybody's doing everything, and then as you get larger, you start specializing, and you start having the support people being different and the success people being different and the onboarding and implementation. Where are you now in that range of companies, sizes and roles, being specific or general, in terms of your group right now?
Yeah, we just raised a Series C back in what feels like yesterday, but was May.
Wow. Hard time to do it, so congratulations on that.
Yeah, no, that it was definitely a big accomplishment. So in terms of the maturity of our organization, I think it's a very specialized, unique product and use case. So implementation onboarding is even more important than typically at another SaaS company. Really setting those expectations early on and scoping out implementation is so important to setting up the customer for success, who are our key personas, our key audience aren't your typical technology buyers. They're in-house attorneys. So having to really shape and mold their perception of what a software company, how they engage with them during this process is huge. It's a big education piece. So we're constantly testing new things. We're quarterly kind of taking a look back at, hey, how can we provide a better experience for customers? How can we better communicate what our engagement model looks like moving forward after implementation? How can we get involved earlier to make sure we hit the ground running with onboarding and implementation? So there's a lot of things that we're constantly rethinking and really kind of going in, which is fun. It's exciting. Having had the opportunity to work on that stuff is something that I was looking for in a new opportunity. So it's fun.
Yeah, so when I think of law firms, I actually spent my first 5 of my career years with law firms. I was doing like database work stuff so I saw, in my mind, I still think it's like very paper-based, people banging away on Windows 95 machines and things like that. Has that matured at all? Or I think between legal and insurance, they're just in this like archaic, walking around with big folders and binders and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think where it varies is that you have your typical law firms. We work more so with in-house attorneys. So you're thinking big in-house teams that the Pepsis, HPs of the world, which I think they're definitely a step up in terms of maturity and how they're leveraging technology, but not that far in advance from the outside world.
And are those the users that you're dealing with, or are you dealing with like a train-the-trainer type of situation where it's their IT person and they're going to go hopefully not train the attorneys and go from there?
Yeah, it varies. We're working with anyone from legal ops to senior counsels, and then paralegals. So it varies. We work with procurement folks handling some of their buy-side contracts. So that's another important piece, is identifying these folks, understanding what they care about, and the challenges, right? We might have some paralegals who aren't really fond of technology, and they might think that we're there to replace them. So that's a big challenge early on, to address that with the executive buyers and champions and call out that elephant in the room, and to help them understand that this might be competing against what they think is ultimately going to take their position. So there's a lot going into
every industry has that, right? Where people are like, are they going to replace this? It's like, no, you're actually able to focus on that thing that you're really good at, instead of like getting caught up in this like ass backward process that you might be doing right now.
Yeah. That's why it's key. You got to hammer it early and often.
Actually, that probably strikes to what we're trying to frame this whole conversation around, which is the time to value, right? And I know it's something you're passionate about and you're just really focused on, especially since I think you ultimately wind up owning Renewals, correct? Right? Which is, for the people who don't realize, and they're coming more from the project management and professional services and implementation side, can you shine some light on why, as somebody who owns that renewal side, why this is just super important and you're probably the thing you're working on the most right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's the first impressions are everything, and that ultimately will impact the end outcome of a relationship. So from a renewal perspective, our team will not handle the commercial discussion around renewal, but in essence, everything we do leading up to the renewal is the renewal, right? We're owning the renewal per se. So it's super important that we're establishing define success criteria early on. What does success look like for this partnership? Be able to quantify that and measure it along the path and understand how we're trending towards those items. I think also identifying early on, expansion opportunities. So planting those seeds and doing the due diligence before you even meet with the customer to be able to intimately understand their business. How do they make money? What opportunities will lie once we're able to check off those boxes and what success looks like. Where can we land and expand? So there's so much work that's done in the very beginning of the relationship that we can decrease the time to value, ensure expectations are set properly, and set us up for success down the line to not only renew them at full
Apologies
ARR,
for all the alarms going off. I have no idea what's happening. It's like my home alarm system. I'm like, oh, somebody's breaking in. Don't worry about it. Just keep it talking. So that's great. How early are you able to get in? I preach about getting in early in the pre-sales process. Are you brought in before the contract is sent out, or is your implementation so straightforward enough that you don't need to speak with the customers beforehand and it's more of an intro post-sale?
No, it's definitely something that we're looking to implement is getting involved in the pre-sales, and right now I'm actually leading a project to help build out that process. So thanks to you for kind of shedding some insights there. The idea is that we were having to do a lot of discovery on those first calls and confirm a lot of the business details, and we're losing time, and the customers saying to themselves,
these guys talk to each other. We told sales this, right? That's always what I hear.
we're passing this dysfunction off on the customer, right? And this is not ideal for a first impression. So we're talking about it now in terms of what's the right time to get us involved. What types of questions are we asking? And these are really great conversations to be having internally. It really helps you take a step back and understand how we can better set up customers for success, as well as how can we get our salespeople to think about these things, right? Because if we're handing off customers that are ready to onboard rather than earlier on in the stage where they don't have all the appropriate information, that just leads to uncovering all these issues later on, and we all know what that means. It means churn and misaligned expectations and all that bad stuff.
And what I consistently say, probably too much, is that an experienced SaaS sales leader will understand everything that you just said and said, absolutely, we would love you guys earlier on in the process. Unfortunately, from my experience, is that it's usually an inexperienced SaaS leader that's saying, you guys are going to slow this down. You're not too good in pre-sales. And I'm sure you've heard that stuff before. My answer back, and I'll ask some more questions after that, is go right back to the salespeople and say, how often is your phone blowing up, like still 2-3 months after the contract's been sold, because they're just all pissed off because you're finding out roadblocks now instead of bringing it up in the sales, and now it's twice as much of a problem. Is that a common thing, or you guys have gotten past that? Or
yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about radical transparency. If you have to hide things from a prospect, then they probably shouldn't be a customer. So it's it's really all about addressing the elephant in the room and demonstrating partnership. And partnership means leveraging your resources internally to help show the customer, here's how we're going to be successful. Because at the end of the day, you need to emphasize with a prospect that, hey, we're the experts at onboarding our product, right? Here, we're going to guide you through this process, and here's the person to lead you here. And that's the customer success implementation team.
And you have the benefit of really focusing in on one industry right now, right? So you can say, hey, this is what we did for X, Y, and Z, their legal teams. A lot of people, they've got a very general solution and they're implementing to whoever needs it because it's able to meet a lot of different verticals and things like that. So I would think that your team, they're experts, right? Like they can, and again, back to what I tell the sales team is that you bring in these non-commissioned people, or you be yourself, and I'm sure you're involved with a ton of these things. It's like, Michael's not on commission. He's just here to make sure you guys set up correctly. Suddenly you're their best friend, right? Like, or if you're working towards that. So is this something where you're trying to get executive alignment, to be able to make sure that, starting 2021, this is how I think this is some of the things we talked about, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So
yeah, no, this is, it's something that's hot on my plate right now. And I think the executive buy-in is certainly there. It's now about coordinating the internal resources to formalize that. So it's going to involve some behavior change, right? Because what we identified is that some of these scoping questions actually should be discovery questions asked by the salesperson. So we need to drive a behavior change there to be asking those questions earlier, and almost use the scoping call per se as a confirmation, right? Hey, here's what we heard, and we want to make sure that we understand this properly. This way we can get you guys up and running, and the time that was communicated.
I actually just finalized this process like literally an hour before we started talking. And, everybody's got different businesses. The company that I finalized this for is just some really complicated human capital management things where they're dealing with like labor laws, but not everybody, right? It's so we work this process out where the sales team will go through and do like their deal qualification stuff. And they're dealing with the buyer, but the buyer is not always the user, right? So, or the tech people behind it. And so what we came up with is that the sales team will be able to like, great, everything from the deal qualification means your SaaS fee is going to be this, right? And let's just say, round numbers, because this is not what we're talking about. Like, let's just say 50K, because that's, mid-market SaaS sounds like a good number. And everybody's like, sounds great. And they're like, however, we've got a standard implementation fee, but we want to just confirm some things that we heard. So we're going to get the implementation team on a call and ask some questions. But I stuck this additional point in, like, go in, create a type form or a Google form, and put in some questions that would be very easy to answer for certain people, but that your buyer might not ever know the answers to, or know that this stuff's even going on in the background. It's kind of like, hey, like, how many years of employee data do you need? Or do you work with labor and unions and things like that? Things that could make an implementation go from like 2 to 4 months. And from there, you're right, it's doing these discovery, because if you do this the second week after they've signed the contract and you're like, we just found out that there's like 10 years of data that we got to pull in, and that's going to add an extra 4 weeks onto, not even going to cost you anything. They're trying to get off their old system and get onto this, all of that stuff. So that's, everybody should tailor it to what their current situation should be. But I think it goes back to what you're saying about understanding your customer's business, finding out what the complexities are. Because as I say, what makes this customer complex is sometimes their unique value proposition to their customers, but you're going to have to deal with it now as you implement it into your system. So like, I just think the net or the TLDR on this is that you got to get in and ask these questions. Your salespeople probably would not know to ask these questions because they're doing deal qual stuff and they're answering the 10, hey, Art, we do 15 things. We're going to ask you these 15 questions. But in order to implement it, you need some of these other things. So I apologize because I probably talked way longer than I should. But, that's how I've come to kind of resolve this issue. And if anybody's listening, like, hit me up on that, because it should be very easy to explain to your exec team when you're trying to get the alignment on these things.
Yeah, and whoever's actually doing the implementation from a technical perspective is going to come there and give you a big virtual hug,
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that are dealing with the brunt of the bullshit after the proper discovery isn't done. The workload, the onus is on them, and when they're not set up for success, it just is going to directly impact the customer sentiment, and internally is going to be a mess.
Yeah, so not going to say that. This is where I'm going to go. We talked about how important this is for a company, and I just don't want to dismiss this. Because this one scenario, think about this. We're going to bring in 10 years data versus 2 years data, or we're going to bring in this addition. It's always data input, right? It's always one of those things. But suddenly, if you're a small team, imagine you close this big deal and they're going to go live now, maybe 3, maybe 6 months later, right? So they're not going to renew, which is on you, or they're going to ask for a break, or some companies start their SaaS fees right from the get-go, but then they can't start using the product for 6 months. So you have that situation, one. Then you've got to pull your dev team in sometimes for them to write some custom work to be able to do some stuff. So now your backlog and the stuff that you've promised out to the market isn't going to happen as fast as well too. Or the worst part about it, people get stressed and they quit and they do other things. So it's a huge issue, especially when people are doing the logo chasing and trying to make their numbers and things like that. So yeah. That's my big spiel. I'll get off the soapbox now. But if there's people listening to this podcast and they're like, why don't they understand how important it is? I am validating exactly. These issues will send shockwaves from up throughout every part of your organization: product management, development, finance, CEO, board level stuff. Your marketing team won't be able to get happy use cases to put in. It's just all of that. Right?
Yeah, we all see the beach ball differently. We're all on different sides of the beach ball. So I would encourage people to just go internally and share that they understand the other side of the beach ball.
Yeah.
And think and challenge people to think differently, to try and understand things from a different perspective. And I think ultimately we should be having fierce conversations with each other. That's a challenge is internally, especially is being afraid to have a radically transparent conversation, because what could come out of it.
Right. And we talked a lot about this, but the funny thing is that you might add 3 to 4 days to the sales cycle. So I'm a sales team, like, get your shit together. Like, listen, I've sold a lot of stuff too, but like, bring us in a little earlier, or, just realize, add in an extra 3 to 4 days. And you've probably heard me say this before, it could get the deal closed faster, because you're like, hey, wait, this is your old vendor turns off on 1/1 and it's 8/1 right now, and it takes 4 months. Like, we need to get in on this, right?
Yeah, I was the goal line back for Oracle, man. I used to push deals right over the finish line. So
Yep.
They used to bring me in and give me the fullback dive, and I would jump over the line of scrimmage and push that deal right into the end zone.
You've just chock full of one-liners for me to, title the podcast, by the way. I'm just trying to figure out some of these things, but I can't wait to put that in that little visual tool that comes up on LinkedIn. That's awesome stuff. So let's change a little bit, because I think we've talked about the time to value here for a little while. Talking with sales teams, the exec alignment. Let's talk about your resources and how they're currently made up. Like, do you have that one role, or are you starting to sort of branch out and to be able to start specializing?
In regards to
onboarding it? Well, so how every organization usually starts off is that one person that does it all, from onboarding, implementation, renewal, CSM, customer support. They do everything. Where are you in that spectrum from that role, which is early stage startup, and then on the other end is Oracle?
Yeah, no, I think we're still very early on. I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be having those conversations, because if things go as planned, we're going to scale very quickly, and we're going to get to a place where we're going to need someone who's dedicated to doing that. So I think right now we're really doing the A/B testing to formalize the process, and this has to do with just the immaturity of the market and the buyers. So it's there's so much green and unknown in the space, that because we essentially pioneered this category of technology. So there's a lot of learning that's still happening, and I think as we start to build that foundation, and not to say that we're not going to ever go back and change things, but there's just too much up in the air right now, where we're still trying to figure out what the best way to approach this is, what type of questions, who's involved from both ends. So I think there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, no, that's smart, and it sounds like you have a bunch of resources, or you're going to have a team that they're going to be able to say in the future, like, hey, you know what? I don't really like that part of it, but I really like this part. And you'd be like, oh, because it's kind of like when you write a job description and you're working with your human resources person and you just put everything in there. And then you start interviewing people and you're like, you know what? I was thinking of creating a specialist role and they're just going to do all of like the data loading. Like they're really good for that stuff, but they just don't want to talk to customers too much. They'll do it, but they don't want to be the lead. Like, and you start just kind of from osmosis. And I think it's smart not just to kind of latch on to the industry stuff. And you're basically saying like, look, we got a little bit of a different business. We might have to approach it a little differently here.
Yeah, I think that's generally applicable towards a lot of different SaaS offerings, right? It's really dependent on your product, how involved it is from a customer's perspective, what adoption looks like post implementation. These are all things that you need to consider when you think about roles and responsibilities. If someone can capture all of those and not be overwhelmed with roles and responsibilities, then excellent. That kills two birds with one stone. But other offerings, they lend themselves to having someone who's a subject matter expert on the account. Maybe a strategist of some sort that could be kind of productized in a SKU, right? Where onboarding costs X, you're going to get a strategic with a strategic advisor with it. You're going to get a CSM. So I think it's really dependent on who you serve, what your product offering is.
Yeah, I forgot about all of that, where you may have your low end where it's just like they put their credit card in and go, versus like, no, we're gonna have the strategic, we're gonna map out like what 2 years of success looks like, and which is, by the way, not in my I don't do that as I'm getting at. So, but I've seen people do it and it seems to work great. So that's awesome. You had mentioned one thing here that I wanted to get into a little bit, which is you talked about product. How big of or how good is your relationship with product? Are you a pipeline? I would have to think, like, if anybody was giving feedback into the product right now, your team would be high on that list, along with sales, because they're like, we didn't win this deal because we don't have X, and it's like, oh, okay, let's go build X then, right? So
yeah. This is probably gonna sound like I'm bullshitting. But this is why I love the role.
Well, you're a tough New Yorker, so I know you're not bullshit.
That's why I love the customer success role, is that you really sit at the center of things, and you're working with every different team that the company has. So from that perspective, a product, CS to product is obviously a super important relationship to have. For me, I try and get product involved in all of our executive business reviews. Yep. I'm working with them to identify customers for beta features.
Nice.
To shed insights in terms of, what I'm seeing in the marketplace, what types of questions I'm getting from customers. Yep. And how I think that the product can enable customer success and sales to sell more and renew more and drive more adoption. So it's an important relationship to have. I think the feedback loop there is critical to the success of a company. Is first off, product tapping customer success to better understand if things would resonate with customers. And then on the other side of it, customer success being in constant contact in terms of, hey, this is what our customers are asking for. Here's how we can further drive adoption and renew more customers.
No, that's awesome. That's great that you've got a team that can do that. Some teams don't want that, right? They're like, no, we don't, we want to build these features based on what we see the market and not, let our customers own their roadmap. And I'm like, what? Like what? I just don't get that sometimes. I'm like, they don't have to own the whole thing, but, go get a great idea, validate that, it's a two-way street. So no, that's
the best organizations are the ones that are listening. They're listening to what their customers are saying, and they're prioritizing and building things that those customers want.
Yeah, absolutely. That is great. So I had a couple other they're not strung together in a nice little segue, but I just sort of have some of these random ones. When I'm always curious with a organization or a company your size and what you're doing. The one critical question I usually ask CS leaders is, who owns the renewal? And then people are like, well, it's a and I'm like, okay, who gets the commission on it? And then I'm like, then I know who really owns the customer relationship.
Yeah, I've been under different structures at different companies.
Yep.
So at Oracle, it was our job. We were tied to a renewal number individually.
Oh wow, individual. Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then I think, as customer success has evolved, there's a lot of chatter around should we be tied to revenue?
Oh, the relationship would get impaired in that conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my company that I'm at now, and my previous company, we had a revenue target for retention, but it was more so as the organization. It wasn't individual numbers. So our variables were somewhat based upon our renewal rate.
Yep.
Which, I'm in favor for, as I talked to you about before, everything you do from the time you kick off with a customer to the day that they ink the renewal paper, you're in a renewal conversation, right?
Yep.
So whether it's you're the one talking about the commercials or not, at the end of the day, you handle renewals, right?
Right.
So I think it all comes down to the commercial aspect. Are you having the commercial conversations? And right now I'm not. I would feel comfortable in a situation if I had to.
Yeah.
That being said, I see the other side of the coin in terms of, not being, not kind of, being in a situation where you're almost a hypocrite, right? You're trying to advocate on behalf of the customer, but also, hey, do you guys want to do this
so I get my renewal? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you want to upgrade to X more amount. So
yeah,
it's an interesting conversation.
I don't think there's a right or a wrong way, to be honest with you. I think it's all about where you are as an organization and how your current staff is, and I don't know, like certain people. I mean, don't get me wrong. You have to make the correct decision where you are as a company, but in the theory aspect, I can see how it can go either way, and I've seen it be successful. I saw the people when I was at Virgin. There was a real concern that we were selling a human resources people. It was a very feel-good product, and we were really worried that these people who are really good at engaging in that conversation with people on a day in and day out basis about their strategy, we did not see them as being able to push renewal contracts at all. And pleasantly surprised in some of the people that wound up being really good with that were not the ones that you would expect at all, and a little bit of vice versa, and wound up breaking up into all these different specialization roles and things like that, and creating different teams based on the structures and things like that. So
there's a formula for both approaches. Where it goes wrong is when it's there's a lot of gray area, right? Where roles and responsibilities are not communicated specifically to the customer. I think that's where you get into trouble, is the customer doesn't know who's who owns what, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you get into trouble. Is this person handling the commercials? Are they focused on my adoption? What? Yeah. I think that needs to be clearly defined at the very beginning of the relationship.
Right in the sales, right? In the sales, right? We would say pre-sales, you're talking to salesperson, then you're in implementation. But and this where I've liked it is you're in implementation, but you've already met the CSM, and the CSM's involved. They're kind of the coach, and at that point in time, you're going to hand it off to a running play, and that's the onboarding team, and then those types of metaphors. But basically, you show them in pre-sales that number line of the engagement, and they know. And if there's somebody else being brought in for commercials, you're like, oh, this point right here, that's when you're going to meet the renewals person, and it's really whatever works
and
best.
just calling it what it is. I think that's the most important thing. Salespeople are so concerned with we're going to be focused on your growth, or just say what it is. You're a salesperson.
We want to renew you. We want to keep your business.
It's okay. This is how you feed your children. This is why you sold the deal. It's okay to tell people that,
It's a gig, right? Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's probably, I think it's a good 40 minutes or so of the good stuff. So what I've been trying to do, and I think I missed out on my last one, so I'm making sure I do it on this one. For those of you listening to years in the future, we are still under the COVID pandemic, although they just started giving vaccines out. But what has your pandemic hobby been? Bread making, macrame. What are we talking here?
I'm probably going to sound like a nerd. I've played a ton of Call of Duty.
That's awesome.
But on a more positive note, I've read 2 books.
Oh, that's awesome.
Got to finish a third, and I've put a lot of emphasis and focus on communication and driving empathy.
Yeah.
Specifically by reading Never Split the Difference. So that's been something that I've
Wow, I should read
put a lot of energy focus on.
Yeah. I am reading one right now actually, but I noticed like, wow, I'm reading lots of content, but nothing that's like, hey, can you keep your attention for more than 20 minutes on a Medium article or something like that? So I appreciate that. And Call of Duty, right? If you've got the headset on and you're talking trash, like that's interactive as far as I'm concerned, right?
It's sadly been some of the most social things I've done all year. So
yeah, well, we're getting there. We're getting there. So listen, it's been a huge pleasure. I'll put all your stuff, on the post and everything. And looking forward, we should definitely do another one like 6 months or so now and see how things have gone. But just hold on one quick second. I'm going to stop the recording, then we'll just do a quick chat after that. So
cool.